Welcome everybody. This is going to be a short video about an interesting development in the meta with the GOAT format European Championship, really centering around one card, which is Zombyra the Dark. This is the first place list. Anthony Alvarado looks like a very standard chaos list, but he is cutting a few of the flip monsters, and now I'm trying to think what else did he cut here. So he's got two Knight Assailants, he cut one Spy, and he added the three Zombyras. Oh, a Tsukiyomi it looks like. So I think this is really interesting. And it goes back to a point I made in one of my other videos, which was the prevalence of more or less what I'm calling hybrid builds. Stuff like this, if you want to call it Flip Warrior. And what basically occurred, I'll just give a short synopsis of this, is Warrior's biggest weakness, I'd say, is not getting cheesy ass pluses off stuff like spies, decos, and magician of faiths, as well as the inherent ability of Chaos Turbo to use those cards and recycle them and resolve faiths. The warrior player doesn't have too many difficulties dealing with face down monsters, but there is a limit to what you can do to face down stuff. Good turbo players are going to force you to use resources and then start bluffing serpents, and the longer they survive, the more likely they are to resolve a faith. So what Warrior started doing was basically uh, taking a page out of their book and using some flip monsters. Why this can also be beneficial is if you're setting really powerful flip monsters like this and they get noblemen, that takes that right out of your opponent's Chaos Turbo list as well, assuming you're playing Chaos Turbo. And these cards are a lot more useful to them than they are you. So if you set a faith and it gets nobleman, it's like, okay, we went 1 for 1 and cleared out their deck. Spy is another huge problem card for Warrior. If that gets nobleman and that gets ripped out of their deck, so what? The other interesting point I'll make is that these flip monsters can be used very aggressively. Um, Gravekeeper Spy, I mean, really, when you think about it, it kind of puts most warrior cards to shame with how aggressive it can be if you need it to be. If you set a Spy and then flip it, you've got 24 presented on board split between two bodies. Um, Whether or not two bodies is better than one is up for debate. It's going to make sense in some situations, some not so much to be split. Obviously, don't have a choice. The downside, again, is you can't attack with it the turn it's summoned, but in a worst case scenario, if you really need to make pushes, a correct play could be to normal summon a Gravekeeper Spy and attack. Same thing with Deco. Good players, albeit on very rare occasions, can just normal summon a Deco and just push. This is an aggressive deck, and the longer you wait in a warrior list to end the game, the worse. So that's kind of what the development has been over the last 3 weeks, which is that warriors either are siding or just straight up integrating flip monsters into their main deck, which I think was really, really smart. I don't know who popularized that. To some degree, it may have been LaBounty. He was experimenting with faiths in the main. I played warrior and teched in faiths right after he did and really liked it. You can see he's got these spies in the side. I think we're going to be seeing more and more often at least the spies in the main, like maybe one faith, two spies. Um, Reaper can be good, but I'm not sure it deserves a spot in the main. That's just personal preference. But spy is just, it's good on your end, and it prevents, if it gets nobleman, it removes the biggest problem card from your opponent's decks. That just seems so good. So kind of what I'm getting at there is, again, warrior is just putting in flip monsters. What I thought was really interesting and what's going to be the topic of discussion more or less this week is that turbo players are returning the favor. So Chaos is integrating warriors and Zombyra the Dark. I think this is a really interesting development. Chaos or Warrior players who are saying, "Hey, we're gonna take a page out of your book and use it against you." And now Turbo players are saying, "Well, screw you. I'm gonna do the same thing." And they're playing Zombyra. And Zombyra is particularly good in Turbo because you don't really need to attack with it ever. 21 is such an amazing breakpoint that you can just wall with a Zombyra. And if you thought Warriors had a difficult time getting over spies, imagine how pissed off they're going to be when you just stick a Zombyra and you don't attack and their Sakus are dead. They can't get over it. They have to wait till they top deck like a Snatch Steal or something. It is very, very tough. And that slows down the game so much for Turbo, which is exactly what you want to occur. As a, I guess, corollary to that, um, Ivan Rosito is playing two of these in the side deck. I think 2100 is the new 2000. Turbo players are going to be playing at least one in the side, if not two, if not some sort of integration in the main, in my opinion. I think this is just a really, really smart play. Zombyra itself, even in like roguish matchups or other matchups, it's already kind of a good card. And it being a good card in other matchups, as well as just maybe having the ability to outright win you the game against Warrior, or at least slow the game down enough where you're going to win the game a few turns from now, is just incredibly good. I mean, I think this was an awesome tech choice, and you've seen for a little bit now, like one Zombyra in the side or something like that. You see, I don't know who else had it here. Berserk Gorillas. Maybe it wasn't this event. But yeah, this is 3 Berserk, but this is not the same deck. And the difference with Berserk Gorilla is if you bring that in versus a Warrior, now that they're playing flips, it's just gonna ape right into a flip monster that your opponent wants it to attack into. It's gonna ape right into a Sakuretsu armor, and it doesn't really do you any good. They can mind con it, switch it to defense position, and just kill it. So that's a really interesting development. Now you could say, hey, Zombyra isn't good if you need to aggro like a Reasoning Gate Turbo player down or something, which is true. It does have some drawbacks. Um, the reason this card probably hasn't seen more play in Warriors themselves is that their game plan is to win the game as quickly as possible. That is why Deco and Spy could be relatively easily integrated. They are very, um, I won't say like intimidating threats, but they're threats that very rarely you minus on. So you kind of cover two bases there. With Zombyra, I'm really starting to wonder whether or not that becomes part of the core warrior package. It really does, it can beat over spies, it can beat over defense position sorks, it can beat over pretty much any monster in the format. I mean, other than like attack position sork, BLS. I'm really trying to think what it doesn't solve for. I mean, it's good against Earth aggro. I'm really wondering if that becomes like a one of, at least in the main deck for Warriors. So where this all leads is that, well, actually, before I get to that point, look at this side. I mean, this is of course, a meta call, which is that, hey, I'm Turbo, I'm the best deck in the format. I have one really weak matchup that a lot of really good players are going to be on, which is Warrior. And look at this side. I mean, just that is a Warrior's worst nightmare. I mean, holy shit. If you look at like these sides, 4 battle traps, torrential, which torrential not in the main is surprising. That's a little strange. This might be even coming in like when they bring in their flip package. You got 2 of these for Warrior. You can side in your card destruction and your MST in the side too. This is interesting, this side deck. But really kind of the point I'm trying to get at here is that Warrior is teching extremely, extremely heavily for Turbo because Turbo is by far the most representative deck, or represented deck. And now Turbo not that it hasn't in the past, but Turbo is extremely heavily siding and teching main decks for Warrior. So, in my opinion, I think the best way to put it is the meta is becoming a little incestuous. It just, you know, kind of, I think that is the best way to put it, is it's becoming a little incestuous. So I really think that opens up a lot of opportunity for shit like this to come in and start taking tournaments. A few weeks ago, we had the Chaos Turbo, or, not, or Reasoning Gate Turbo rather, with paid 17. Because the meta is just getting like it's 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 not rock paper scissors anymore. It's that Chaos Turbo and Warrior are just going at each other and disrespecting the rest of the format. And I think that's going to lead, if there were good players that were playing off meta stuff like this, which unfortunately all the good players are just tryharding Turbo and Warrior. But if a really good player, came in with RGT and perfected the deck, or Panda Burn, there are some good Panda Burn players, but if a number of them came in with Panda Burn, or a number of them came in with something like a Cat OTK, I really do think that is a huge opportunity to just cheese some lazy ass wins. Um, and I won't say lazy. I'll say some easy wins, because if you're going up against turbo players or warrior players that have nothing sided for you, whether or not that's burn with walks or stuff that um, can cause a lot of grief for um, reasoning gate, that it can be really easy to win with those decks if you're good with them and you build it right and you know how to play around what your opponent is doing. The one thing I will say is Scapegoat is is totally a nightmare for normal reasoning gate decks, not so much this. A lot of players are siding in. Uh, there was a list in here somewhere. Is this it? Yeah, this is it. A lot of players are siding in goat packages now, so you can kind of smokescreen into um, a chaos control type build, and that's another nightmare for warrior. So I mean, there's just so much side deck hate and so much inbreeding with these decks on beating their most favored or difficult matchup that I just really think that is going to leave a wide gaping open hole for something different to come in here. And I was trying to figure out what that was. I don't think it's going to be, and this is a really cool deck. I mean, this could be a whole other video, but I don't think it's going to be something like this. Um, these types of goat control decks, I was thinking, is it goat control that, could come back and capitalize on that? But I just think goat control, and a lot of the players that play goat control have really anchored to a lot of like nostalgia, like favorite cards that they played, you know, however many years ago now, like what is it, like 15 or 18 years now in goat format. And they don't really, I don't even know if they like want to win. Like most normal goat control decks just look like absolute shit. Like it's fun to play like a lot of these cards, but like I don't know. Like when you're dealing like against like a fully optimized discard engine and like assailants and card destructions and faiths, like you're not gonna win. I'm sorry. Like it can be fun to play that deck, and like people say it's the most skillful deck in the format. If you make one mistake, you lose, which is true, but that in and of itself makes it a bad deck. It's kind of like Reasoning Gate too. If you make one mistake with like a normal Reasoning Gate build, you're probably gonna lose. So that kind of makes it in that tier two. But I think something like Burn, which like a really good player could probably get up to speed somewhat more quickly, could really blow open the meta. But let me know what some of your guys' thoughts are. I just really think this is an interesting development that Warriors are becoming more like Chaos Turbo, and Chaos Turbo is becoming a lot more like Warriors, and they are just not respecting anything else. It is Turbo versus Warrior, and if you aren't within that cohort, screw you. Uh, Let me know if there are any other decks that you think could take the meta by storm. The only other deck I think that's probably in contention would be Chaos Control, but it seems like Chaos Turbo is getting closer to Chaos Control with a lot of the sides like this. And there were a few decks in that hybrid video I did a few weeks ago which were main decking the metas and scapegoats. Oh yeah, this was a cool list too. It's really cool in a format this old that we still get innovations like this. I don't think this is particularly good. Maybe not at 3 at least. Like if you wanted to tech 1 or 2 in, I think that could be an interesting alternative to Jar. But like the thing with Jar is it gets you 1 turn closer to Trinity and then 1 turn closer to recycling Trinity. You could say the same thing that Time Seal gets your opponent like 1 turn farther away from Trinity, but if Trinity's already resolved, I'm not sure that matters as much, and it also depends on what type of deck your opponent is playing. I feel like drawing more in a deck like this is more important than not drawing more. Like Time Seal might be really good against Turbo, I'm thinking, just because their game plan is to just kind of turbo through their deck and then recycle spells and abuse the shit out of a discard engine. I don't know if this is good versus other decks. I'm really not sure. I haven't experimented with it at all, but that's just some of my thoughts on the way the meta's shaping up here. It's really refreshing to see that things are changing. And, well, here we go. This is a Zombyra in the main for a warrior deck. Preemptively. It's just so interesting. Like, this is what I think warriors are going to look more and more like in the coming months. And it's kind of funny that he had a Zombyra in the main prior, or in the same tournament where a bunch of other players had Zombyras in the main or the side, like in spades. So I don't really know how to end this video. I'm just ranting. Everything's kind of catching my eye. I was looking through these deck lists for a while, and even looking at them again, like I'm still catching stuff that's just like weird developments. Asura, I don't think Asura's here to stay. I don't think that's a good side deck card at all. I think something that this kind of prompts something in my mind, but I think something that might be smart is for warriors, because the meta is becoming inbred, is if you kind of want to get 1 step ahead of that, maybe teching in a cliff in your side, just so that you don't get boinked by burn. Well, you're still probably going to get boinked by burn to some degree, but less or so. At least you have some outs. And another, kind of side note is this is an interesting side deck. Yeah, this is some like big brain side deck shit. I don't know. This is cool. Like I think he's very much so respecting burn. And the cool thing about Mobius brain control is it does cover your ass to some degree with burn, but it's also pretty good in the mirror with a warrior build. So you're kind of getting a 2-for-1 with that. I really like that. I think Mobius brain control is a much lower opportunity cost type of deal than some anti-burn cards. You could say similar things with Wok. Like Wok is a shit card like 95% of the time, but it is a match winning card in time, and it's a match winning card against burn. So I don't know how I feel about Wok. I just really like it really does depend on like what the tournament rules are, because Wok's just gonna straight up win you the game, or the match rather, like if you expect to go into time. It has narrow applications, but those applications are like, it's not like it helps you win the game like Mobius or Brain Control. It just wins you the game. Like, so it's kind of a win button in certain situations. So I think it's here to stay. Whether or not it's at 1 or 2, I just like side deck cards that cover your ass in multiple ways. I'm trying to look for some other like really good examples of that. Like a bad example of that is Karibo in a deck like this. Like Karibo really only helps you against RGT. Maybe against Panda Burn it's gonna cover you. Gasura Priest really only takes care of goats. Like it's kind of like a one-use card. Kaiku's a good example. Like Kaiku is really good against Reason Gate Turbo. It's really good against Chaos Turbo. Like so, it covers multiple matchups. It can be good in like rogue matchups. I mean, you might have it get beaten over against Earth aggro, but at least they can't get Gigantes out. Um, so I think that's pretty interesting. Like here's a good kind of point to drive this home. Like Threatening Roar versus Karibo. Karibo, if you're playing a deck with like Metamorphosis, definitely has a little bit more utility. And there's something to be said about if your opponent commits with Reasoning Gate Turbo and you can, have them fully commit and then Karibo. With Threatening Roar, you're not going to have that luxury, but Threatening Roar overall is much better versus Burn, and it's also already really good in um, or versus Reasoning Gate Turbo. And with a deck like this, it can come in versus Warrior. So you're kind of covering three bases with one card, which is why I think like there's really something to be said about comparing the use cases a card has and the opportunity cost of playing it. Like if you have something that's covering one very rare niche matchup, that very rare niche matchup better be very detrimental to you that you're going to lose 100% of the time, and the side deck card solves that. This is something I've been meaning to make a video on for a while actually, and I just went off on a tangent on like some other stuff that's on my mind with this, but this tournament really got me thinking about the meta, and not necessarily just the meta, but how metas work. Because metas are adaptive, um, which means even if a meta gets solved, um, or is, at least for a short amount of time stagnant, um, players can capitalize on that, and the fact that players change their deck to adapt to that meta changes the meta in and of itself. Um, in the investments world, in markets, they call that reflexivity. Um, I wouldn't quite call it a self-fulfilling prophecy, but reflexivity is kind of what they call it, um, which is like, I guess like in 08, 09, like when there were a lot of issues with the banking system. Like people were losing confidence, which was causing the bank's capital to decrease in value, and the bank's capital and assets decreasing in value for the book value of whatever they had on the books. Um, like it was basically a death spiral, which and don't get me wrong, they took too much risk, but it just kind of feeds in and on itself. So I gotta figure out ways to not just go off on tangents. But really, this channel is just me going off on tangents and recording some of my thoughts. So if you guys like it, let me know. If you don't, you want something more short and concise, well, this probably isn't the place, to be honest. This probably is not the place. So let me know what some of your thoughts are in the comments. Drop a like, subscribe, and for now, take it easy.